Aleister Crowley's 81st Liber, the butterfly net, continues with chapter 21 of the renewal of the Great Attack and how it fared. Douglas had been decidedly put out by the death of his wife. After all, she had been a sort of habit, a useful drudge. When all was said, besides, he missed acutely the pleasures of torturing her. His suspicions, the bona fides of Balak, were conjoined with actual annoyance. It was at this painful moment in his career that Kremers came to the rescue. A widowed friend of hers had left a daughter in her charge, for Kremers had the great gift of inspiring confidence. This daughter was being educated in a convent in Belgium. The old woman immediately telegraphed for her and presented her to Douglas with the compliments of the season. Nothing could have been more timely or agreeable. She was a gentle, innocent child, as pretty and charming as he had ever seen. It was a great point in the game of the astute Kremers to have pleased the sorcerer, and she began insensibly to gain ascendancy over his spirit. He had at first suspected her of being an emissary of his colleague, A.B., who might naturally wish to destroy him, for the plan of the sorcerer who wishes to be sole and supreme is to destroy all rivals, enemies, and companions, while the magician attains supremacy and unity by constantly uniting himself with others and finding himself equally in every element of existence. It is the difference between hate and love. He had been careful to examine her magically and found no trace of A.B. in her aura. On the contrary, he concluded that her ambition was to supplant A.B., and that went well with his own ideas. But first, he must get her into his 14 and have a permanent hold over her. She, on the other hand, appeared singly desirous of making herself a treasure to him. She knew the one torment that gnawed continually at his liver, the hate of Cyril Gray, and she proposed to herself to win him wholly by offering that gentleman's scalp. She sharpened her linguistic tomahawk. One fine day in April, she tackled him openly on the subject. Say, great one, you and I gotta have another peek at that spirit writing. Seems to me that was a fool's game down there. She jerked her head towards the river. And I don't say, but what you done right about Balak. Douglas glanced at her sharply in his most dangerous mood, and how much did she know of a certain recent maneuver? But she went on quite placidly. Now, looky here. We got these guys, and we got to get them where they live. You've been hitting at their strong point. Now I tell you something. That girl, she lived 5 years with Lavinia King. Darn her. I see that bright daughter of Terpsichore only 5 minutes, but she didn't leave one moral hanging on me. No, sir. Now see here, big chief. You've been beating the water for them, fish and natural. Off they goes. For the land's sake, looky here. I gotta look after this business, and all I need is just one hook and line and a pailful o' bait. And if I don't land her, never trust me no more. Ain't I somebody always? Didn't I down old Blavatsky? Sure I did. And ain't this like eating pie after that? Now, surely at some point I'll probably share more of Blavatsky. I don't agree with Blavatsky as much as Crowley, so there's going to be more commentary or It's more actually that there's more. The Blavatsky was more limited per se, so in the scope. So therefore, we would say would also tend to more commentary, right? The sorcerer deliberated with himself a while. Then he consulted his familiar demons. The omens were confusing. He thought that perhaps he had put his question ambiguously. He tried again. In other words, he had begun by asking vaguely whether Kremers would succeed in her mission, which had earned him a very positive yes, flanked by a quite unintelligible message about deception, the false Dmitri, and the wrong horse. Also some apparent nonsense about Scotland and an island. This time he asked whether Kremers would succeed in luring Lisa to her destruction. This time the answer was more favorable, though tremulous. But ever since his wife's death, his demons had behaved very strangely. They seemed the prey of hesitation and even of fear. Such as it was, however, their voice now jumped with his own convictions, and he agreed to her proposal. They spent the evening merrily in torturing a cat by blinding it, and then squirting sulfuric acid on it from a syringe. And in the morning, Kremers, with Abdul Bey for bait, set out upon her journey to Nepal's. Arrived in that favored spot, she bade Abdul Bey enjoy the scenery and hold his peace. She would warn him when the hour struck, for Kremers was a highly practical old person. She was not like St. James devils, who believe and tremble. She disbelieved, but she trembled all the same. She hated truth because the truth sets men free, and therefore makes them happy, but she had too much sense to shut her eyes to it. And the word kafir, as a reference to misbelieving, also refers to, that Semitic root of KPR, covering. So it's the day of covering up. Yom Kippur, and though she doubted the causes of magic and scoffed at all spiritual theory, she could not deny the effects. It was no idle boast of hers that she had destroyed Madame Blavatsky. Together with another woman, she had wormed her way into the big-hearted Theosophist's confidence and betrayed her folly at the proper moment. She had tried the same game on another adept, but when he found her out, and she knew it, he had merely continued his kindness. The alternative before her was repentance or brain fever, and she had chosen the latter. Her disbelief in magic had left her with its correlate, a belief in death. It was the one thing she feared besides magic itself, but she did not make the mistake of being in a hurry on that account. The strength of her character was very great in its own way, and she possessed infinite reserves of patience. She played the game with no thought of victory, and this is half the secret of playing most games of importance. To do right for its own sake is righteousness. Though if you apply this obvious truth to the art of the Philistine calls you names and your morals in question. See, that's why before Aleister Crowley died, they were inventing a Palestinian state, because they know it's long been an insult, and it was an insult among the Jews, and there were a lot more Satanists in the region back in the day, you could say, or at least a higher percentage of the population. But were they plush wanderers? Ton for the female Satan? Not, Of course, Leviathan is thought to be male, so you can't necessarily say because that TN root, but anyways, that's a different point entirely. Kremers, and your morals question. Kremers was a genuine artist in malice. She was not even glad when she had harmed a friend and benefactor. Well, regardless of your relation to the people, you should probably, not violate other people's rights. However, irreparably, nothing could ever make her glad, but she was contented with herself on such occasions. She felt a sort of sense of duty alone, she denied herself every possible pleasure. She hated happiness in the abstract in a genuinely Puritan spirit, and she objected to eat a good dinner herself, as much as to consent that anyone else should eat it. Her principal motive in assisting Abdul Bey to his heart's desire was the cynical confidence that Lisa was capable of pouring him out a hell broth at least 40% above proof. The summer was well begun. The sun had turned towards the southern hemisphere once more. He had entered the sign of the lion, with fierce and noble heat, scarred the dry slopes of Pasalapo. Eliel spent most of her time in the terrace, on the terrace of the moon, at her needlework, watching the ships as they sailed by. The peasants at their labor, are their pastimes. It was a little before sunset on the 1st of August. She was leaning over the wall of the terrace. Sister Clara had gone up to the house to make ready for the adoration of the setting of the sun. Up the uneven flagstones of the lane below toiled the old fishwife with her burden, and looked up with the usual cheery greeting. At that moment the crones slipped and fell. "I'm afraid I've hurt my back," she cried with an adoration to some saint. "I can't get up." Elio, whether she understood the Italian words fully or no, could not mistake the nature of the accident. She did not hesitate. In a moment she had lowered herself from the wall. She bent down and gave her hand to the old woman. "Say," said the old woman in English, "that boy is just crazy about you, and he's the loveliest man on God's earth. Won't you say one word to him?" Lisa's jaw dropped in amazement. "What? Who?" she stammered. "Why, that perfectly sweet Turk, Abdul. Sure you know him, dearie." Cremers was watching Lisa's face. She read the answer. She gave a low whistle, and around the corner Abdul Bey came running. He took Lisa in his arms and rained kisses passionately on her mouth. She had no thought of resistance. The situation entranced her. The captive princess, the intrigue, the fairy prince. Every syllable was a poem. "I've longed for you every hour for months," she cried between his kisses. "Why, oh why, didn't you come for me before?" She had no idea that she was not telling the truth. The past was wiped clean out of her mind by the swirl of the new impulse. And once outside the enchanted circle of the garden, her vow in tatters, there was nothing to remind her. "I'm here now." The words burst like explosions from his lips. "Come, I've got a yacht waiting. Take me, oh, take me where you will." Cremers was on her feet, spry and businesslike. "We're best out of here," she said. "Let's beat it." Taking Lisa's arms, she and Abdul hurried her down the steps which led to the shore road. Brother Adolfrio's patrol witnessed the scene. He took no notice. It was not against that contingency that he was armed, but at the summons to the adoration he reported the event to his superior. Brother Onofrio received the news in silence and proceeded to perform the ceremony of the salutation. An hour later, as supper ended, the sound of the bell rang through the house. The visitor was Simon F. He found Cyril dressed in everyday clothes, no more in his green robe. The boy was smoking a cigar upon the terrace where he had read his poem on the day after Walpurgis night. He did not rise to greet his master. "Tell the praetor that you have seen Caius Marius, a fugitive seating upon the ruins of Carthage," he exclaimed. "Don't take it so hardly, boy," cried the old mystic. "The man who makes no mistakes makes nothing. But it is my duty to reprove you, and we had better get it over. Your whole operation was badly conceived in one way or another. It was bound to fail. You select a woman with no moral strength, not even with that code of convention which helps so many weak creatures through their temptations. I foresaw from the first that soon or late she would throw up the experiment. Your words touch me the more deeply because I also foresaw it from the first. Yet you went on with it." "Oh no," Cyril Gray's eyes were half closed. "What do you mean, oh no?" cried the other sharply. He knew his Cyril like a book. "I never even began," murmured the boy dreamily. "You will be polite to explain yourself." Simon's lips took a certain grimness of grip upon themselves. "This telegram had consoled me in my grief," said Cyril, taking with languid grace a slip of paper from his pocket. "It came last week. Simon If turned it towards the light. Harati, he read. A code word, I suppose, but this is dated from Ionia, from the holy house, where himself is. Himself was the word used in the order to designate its head. Yes, said Cyril softly. I was fortunate enough to interest himself in the experiment. So, Sister Sybil has been there, under the charge of the Mahabara Fong. You young devil. It was the first time that Sybil Simon had been startled in 40 years. So you arranged this little game to draw the enemy's fire. Naturally, the safety of Sisters Sybil was the first consideration. And Horatii? It's not a code word. I think it must be Roman history. 3 boys. Rather a lot, isn't it? They'll be needed, said Simon grimly. I have been doing magic too. Do tell me. The quest of the Golden Fleece, Cyril. I've been sowing the dragon's teeth. You remember, armed men sprang to life and killed each other. But I don't see any armed men. You will. Haven't you seen the papers? I never see papers. I'm a poet, and I like my lives the way Mother used to make them. While Europe's at war, I have got your old commission back for you, with an appointment as intelligence officer on the staff of General Cripps. It sounds like anarchism, from each according to his powers, to each according to his needs. You know, by the way, what's it about? Anything? The people think it's about the violation of solemn treaties and the rights of the little nations and so on. The governments think it's about a commercial expansion, but I, who made it, know that it is the baptism of blood of the new Aeon. How could we promulgate the law of liberty in a world where freedom has been strangled by industrialism? Men have become such slaves that they submit to laws which would have made a revolution in any other country since the world began. They have registration cards harder to bear than iron fetters. They allow their tyrants to bar them from every pleasure that even their poverty allows them. There is only one way to turn the counter jumper into a Curtius and the factory girl into a Cornelia, and I have taken it. How did you work it? It has been long business, but as you know, Sir Edward is a mystic. You saw that article on fishing, I suppose. Oh yes, I knew that, but I didn't know it was more definite. It was he did it. But he'll lose his place. He's too fair-minded, and in a year they'll clamor for fanatics. It's all right. They'll butt each other's brains out, and then the philosophers will come back and build up a nobler type of civilization. I think you accused me recently of using strong medicine. I was practicing British hypocrisy on you. I had to see the Prime Minister that week. Excuse me if I answer a humorist according to his humor. I want to show you how necessary this step has been. Observe the bourgeoisie is the real criminal, always. I'm with you there. Look at the testimony of literature. In the days of chivalry, our sympathies go with a knight errant who redresses wrongs, with the king whose courage and wisdom deliver his people from their enemies. But when kingship became tyranny and feudalism oppression, we took our heroes from the rebels. Robin Hood, Hereward the Wake, Bonnie Prince Charlie, Rob Roy. It was always the underdog that appealed to the artist. Then industrialism became paramount, and we began in Byron's time to sympathize with the brigands and corsairs. Presently, these were wiped out, and today, or rather, the day before yesterday, we were reduced to loving absolute scoundrels. Arsène Lupin, Raffles, Stingerie, Fantomas, and 100 others are the detectives who, although on the side of society, were equally occupied in making the police look like fools. That is the whole charm of what's his name in Gaboriau and Dupin and Sherlock Holmes. There has never been a real sympathetic detective in fiction who was on good terms with the police. And you must remember that the artist always represents the subconscious will of the people. The literary hack who panders to the bourgeois and makes the bourgeoisie and makes his heroes of millionaire sons has never yet created a character and never will. Well, when the people love a burglar and hate a judge, there's something wrong with the judges. But what are you doing here in a world crisis? I'm over here to buy Italy. Bowling bought Belgium, you know, some time back. He was too thick with Leopold, but the old man had too much sense to deal. He knew he would be the first to go smash when the war came, but Albert pocketed the good red gold without a second thought. Well, because they used poison to extract the gold? Why red? That's partially what the trouble is over. Germany found out about it. And why buy Italy? To keep Austria busy, I suppose. These wops can hardly hope to force the line, especially with the Trentino salient on the flank. Now, some people take issue with some of these terms here, so but it's just the way people talked back then. That's the idea. It would have been better and cheaper to buy Bulgaria, but Gray wouldn't see it. There's the eternal fear of Russia to remember. You know, for several thousand years, Russia has been conquering back and forth, and most of the national and tribal identities of the Slavic people have really been left as a historic footnote. But, you know, there's still some tribes and whatnot that remain at least independent identities, whether or not they're currently being conquered or not at the time, in one way or another. We're fighting against both sides in the Balkans, and that makes Russia half-hearted and endangers the whole intent. But it doesn't matter so long as enough people are killed. The survivors must have elbow room for their souls and the memory of heroic deeds in the lives of them and theirs to weigh against the everlasting pool of material welfare. I wouldn't phrase it like that, but these bad societal situations aren't completely bad societal situations. You know, when those men come back from a few years in the trenches, they'll make short work of the pious person that informs them of the wickedness of smoking and eating meat and drinking beer and being out after 11 o'clock at night and kissing a girl and reading novels and playing cards and going to the theater and whistling on the Sabbath. And of course, you know, in the anybody who's studied the Bible has, or at least read through it, has came across that passage where you're not allowed to touch any woman. You know, this intersex interaction is limited by basically a no contact thing. Hours of being out at night, yeah, that's just that's a new thing. Same with this whistling on Saturday thing. Are the Sabbath not being the biblical Sabbath? That's, you know, obviously invented stuff, but I hope you're right. You're old, which tends, I suppose, to make you optimistic. In my young ear, there always rings the scream of terror of the slave when you offer to strike off his fetters. Now, when you make it about all the little small things rather than a consciousness, yeah, it can kind of come off like a slavery. But when you get past that servant lord stage, you can still be even better at that moving on when it's not about that, you know. All Europe will be scream and stench for years to come, but the new generation will fear neither poverty nor death. They will fear weakness. They will fear dishonor. It is a great program. Qui vivra vera. Meanwhile, I suppose I report to General Cripps. You will meet him running hard, I expect, somewhere in France. It will be a fluke if Paris is saved. As you know, it always takes England 3 years to put her boots on. If we had listened to the men who knew, like Bobs, and fixed up an army of 3 million, there could have been no war, at least not in this particular tangle of alliances. There would have been a social revolution more likely, an ignoble business of greed against greed, which would have left men viler and more enslaved than ever. As it is, the masses on both sides think they are fighting for ideals. Only the governments know what hypocrisy and sham it is, so the ideals will win, both in defeat and victory. Man, only 3 days ago, France was the France of Panama and Dreyfus and Madame Humbert and Madame Steinhill and Madame Pillau, and today she's already the France of Roland and Henry Quatre and Danton and Napoleon and Gambetta and Joan of Arc, and England of the Boer Wars and the Irish massacres and the Marconi scandals and Frank Croft. Oh, give England time. She'll have to be worse before she's better. Talking of time, I must pack up if I am to catch the morning train of the land of hope and glory. The train service is disorganized. I came from Toulon in a destroyer. She'll take you back there. Jack Manners is in command. Report at Toulon to the OC. You'd better start in half an hour. I'll see you safe on board. My car's at the door. Here's your commission. Cyril Gray thrust the document into his pocket, and the two men went up into the house. An hour later, they were aboard the destroyer. They shook hands in silence. Simon If went down the gangway, and Manners gave the word. As they raced northward, they passed under the lee of Abdul's yacht, where Lisa, up to the eyes in champagne, was fondling her new lover. Her little pig-like eyes sparkled through the rolls of fat. Her cheeks, the color and consistency of ripe camembert cheese, sagged, pendulous upon a many-chinned neck, which looked almost coitrous, and the whole surmounted one of those figures dear to engineers because they afford endless food for speculation as to the means of support. The moon was now exercising her full influence, totally unchecked and unbalanced, and the woman's nature being wholly of the body, with as little brain in proportion as a rhinoceros. The effect was seen mostly on the physical plane. Her mind was a mere swamp of succulent luxury. So she sat there and swayed and wallowed over Abdul Bey. Kremers thought she looked like a snowman just beginning to melt. With a sardonic grin, the old woman waved her hand and went on deck. The yacht was now well out in the open sea on her way to Marseille. Yeah, I don't know how there's Marseille. It's like those L's and those LLES. That's quite a bit not to pronounce on a word, but maybe it was spelt differently when it was in like runes or something. And they kept the sound but not the spelling. We find that with the Gallic and the Gaelic and the Tibetan, and here Kremers was to be landed so that she might return to Paris to report her success to Douglas while the lovers went on their honeymoon. The wind blew fresh from the southwest, and Kremers, who was a good sailor, came as near as she ever could to joy as she felt the yacht begin to roll, and pictured the tepid ice cream heroine of romance in the saloon. Meanwhile, the destroyer, her nose burrowing into the sea, hike a ferret, slipped into a warren, drove passionately towards Toulon. The keenness and ecstasy of Cyril's face were so intense that manners rallied him about it. I thought you were one of the all men are brothers crowd, he said, yet you're as keen as mustard to slay your cousin German. Puns, replied Cyril, are the torpedo boat destroyers of the Navy wit. Consider yourself crushed. Your matchless intelligence has not misled you as to my views. All men are brothers. As a magician, I embrace, I caress, I slobber over the cheeks a bloody bill. But fighting in the army is not a magical ceremony. Well, it can be. It is the senseless, idiotic performance of a numbskull, the act, in a word, of a gentleman, and as to my lasting shame, I happen to be born in that class. I love to do it. Be reasonable. It is no pleasure to me, as an immortal god, to sneeze or refuse to render myself a laughing stock to the other Olympians by such indignity. But when my body has a cold in its head, it is proper for it to blow its nose. I do not approve, much less participate, and my body is therefore the more free to act according to its nature, and it blows its nose much harder than it would if I took a hand. That is the advantage of being a magician. All one's different parts are free to act with the utmost possible vigor according to their own natures, because the other parts do not interfere with them. You don't let your navigators into the stoke hole or your stokers into the chart house. The first art in adeptship is to get your elements sorted out and specialized and organized and disciplined. Here and at the first lesson, I think I'll turn in. It's a bit beyond me, Cyril. All I know is that I'm willing to risk my life in a good cause. Now, I remember at an OTO lodge, some guy was relating his trip to Egypt, and a bunch of people who didn't say their evening orisons had made derisive comments about the fact that he was doing a different evening orison. It's like, well, he didn't force it on anybody else. What's the deal here? But it's a rotten bad curse. We have isolated Germany and hemmed her in for years exactly as we did a century ago with Napoleon. Wilhelm, who wanted peace because he was getting fat on it, knew us for his real enemy. In 99, he came within an ace of uniting Europe against us at the time of the Fashoda incident. But we baffled him, and since then, he has been getting deeper in every moment. He tried again over the Boer War. He tried threats, he tried diplomacy, he tried everything. The Balkan War and the Agadir incident showed him his utter helplessness. The Kingdom of Albania, the war in Tripoli proved that he could no longer rely on Italy. And when Russia resorted to so shameless an assassination as that of Sarajevo, my dear good man, England has been a pirate, as she always was. From Hengist and Horsa and the Vikings, she learned the trick. William the Conqueror was a pirate, so was Francis Drake. Look at Morgan, whom we knighted, and all the other buccaneers. Look at our system of privateering. Ever hear of the Alabama? We learnt the secret of sea power. We can cut the alimentary canal of any nation on Europe, bar Switzerland and Russia. Hence our fear of Russia. Is the Jolly Roger, you should fly, Jack Manners. We stood all Germany's expansion. We said that we were her cousins, but when she started a navy, that was another barrel of fish. I don't think I can bear this, So, over 100 years, we're seeing, much the same problems arise with the same sort of sources. You're up. I'm one of the pirate crew. Oh, you're Captain Kidd? I have already stated my opinion as to the conversational value of puns. I'm going to turn in, you get busy, and find a neutral ship to rob. I shall do my best to maintain the law of the sea. made by the pirate to suit his game. Good God, I can't see why we shouldn't be sensible. Why must we invoke law and gospel every time we want to do a dirty act? My character is strong enough to let me kill all the Germans I can without persuading myself that I'm saving them from Prussian tyranny. Good night. The youth is unintelligible or immoral, thought Manners as he turned his face to the spindrift, but I bet he kills a lot of Germans. Chapter 22 has another one of those paragraph long titles, and I'll reiterate that here for a moment. Of a certain dawn upon our old friend, the Boulevard Arago, and of the loves of Lisa La Igofria and Abdul Bey, how they prospered, of the conclusion of the false alarm, of the great experiment, and of a conference between Douglas and his subordinates.